All right, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. It is 5:02. Welcome everyone to the September 1st, 2021.
Recording in progress.
Keeping with an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, signed into law by Governor Baker on June 16th, 2021. This meeting will be conducted remotely over Zoom. Attendance by board members will be remote and attendance shall count towards quorum. The meeting will be broadcast live on Facebook and recorded on ECAP. This meeting is open to the public. We will take questions by the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Please make sure to include your full name and address, and we'll do our best to answer all questions. However, we will not read questions that have already been answered. So with that, we'll move on to minutes. First up is the regular minutes from August 23rd, 2021. Are there any edits, comments? No? All right. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
And a second?
Wiseman, so moved. Second.
I can barely hear you guys. All right, roll call vote.
O'Neill, yes.
Durant, yes.
DeLuca, yes.
Wiseman, yes.
Star, yes.
Excellent, thank you. All right, the next set of minutes is from the executive session from Thursday, July 22nd, 2021. Any comments or edits that we want to hold the minutes for? All right, can I get a motion to approve the executive session minutes from July 22nd, 2021?
Star, so moved.
A second?
O'Neill, second. O'Neill, second.
Roll call vote.
O'Neill, yes.
Durant, yes.
DeLuca, yes.
Wiseman, yes.
Star, yes.
All right, the next set of minutes are from executive session, August 23rd, 2021. Does anyone want me to hold the minutes for comments or edits? All right, can I get a motion to accept the executive session minutes from August 23rd, 2021?
O'Neill, so moved.
Durant will second. So it's a roll call vote.
O'Neill, yes.
Durant, yes.
DeLuca, yes.
Wiseman, yes.
Star, yes.
Great, thank you. And I apologize for the dog. So discussion and vote to approve the face mask policy. It's a second reading, and I'm going to turn it over actually to Jackie to go over the edits that she made based on our last meeting.
Thanks, Michelle. So I incorporated the edits that we discussed, and I also updated the references on the back or at the bottom of the page for the most recent references to the Mass Department of Public Health, DESE, CDC, and the Mass Association of School Committees. So I don't know if anyone has any comments or questions about the edits made or found anything else that needs to be changed.
This is Caroline. Jackie, I thought it was really great. I mean, clear, not too long. So won't take people, you know, none of us seems to be able to read for very long at a given time. So I think it's really clear and really well written. Thank you for doing that.
Yes, thank you for doing that. Anyone else? Okay, so we don't need to officially read it again. We can just move to vote, correct? All right, yes. So I am looking for a motion to accept the face coverings policy as presented tonight.
Wiseman, so moved.
A second?
Star,
O'Neill,
second.
Roll call vote.
Give it to Star. O'Neill, yes.
Durant, yes.
Beat ya.
DeLuca, yes.
Wiseman, yes.
Star, yes.
All right, excellent. Okay, discussion on COVID protocols, a possible vote on mask guidelines and travel guidelines. Back to Jackie.
Thanks. So I incorporated the changes that we discussed. There still are a couple of issues that we should go over. If you go down to item number 4, I still have 4E still says face shields unless in conjunction with a cloth face covering or is discussed below. And then we'll discuss that in a minute, and I can update that after our discussion. On 6E, this is when face coverings may be removed. I added some wording in there to mirror some of the language in the DESE guidance, which was based on some music guidance that came out. So if you see, it still says when necessary to participate in elective classes, such as the use of wind instruments and band. And then I wrote, when traditional masks cannot be worn, other mitigation measures must be used, such as instrument masks, masks with a slit or hole cut for the mouthpiece, or bell covers, and there must be social distancing of at least 3 feet. Such activities should be held outdoors when possible. I didn't know if you wanted to include instrument masks as a mitigation possibility.
Is that a thing? Instrument masks? I know they used shields last year.
Yeah, I mean, this was in the DESE guidance, but I don't remember whether we talked about that particular issue before. So I just wanted to get your feedback on whether you wanted to look into it, whether we want to just not include it as an option.
We could use it as a recommendation until we have a chance to look into it further. It actually sounds like a good idea to me. I mean, we've talked about this. The truth is, if kids are ever inside, any kind of use of wind instruments does create a greater risk than, other situations. So if there are, I'm not really that familiar with those. It makes sense though. I mean, the slit for the mouthpiece, but otherwise masks. So it would mean that presumably the nose would still be covered and
Jeff Benson is, those music protocols are still in place, and he is making use of any of the singing or instrument protections that are available.
But there may be some that are actually more effective than others. So that's kind of my question. I mean, I haven't seen this.
I do.
Yeah, he does state that he's using an extra layer of precaution when it comes to flutes and piccolos. So that is something that he is doing. Jeff has been absolutely wonderful and proactive in all of this. He really is looking out, because his number one thing, as all of us, is really that the kids are able to play and participate as much as possible. So looking at an email that he sent, and he is saying that there is an extra layer of precaution with flutes and piccolos, especially in addition to the recommendations from the MMEA guidance.
Yeah, he really is fortifying any recommendation with the ceiling as opposed to the floor.
Do you know if he used masks like this at all?
They're actually going to try to do that, those activities outdoors, and a mask isn't required outdoors.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to misspeak, but I recall this discussion last year, and I think that with all of the activities outside, the use of, I think we had talked about, there are masks that can basically almost like zip open and closed, or they have a slit in them.
They have a slit.
And I think there was some discussion around the practicality of, swapping out between a regular mask and a mask with a slit just for music class, and whether or not they've got the slit open and closed, and sort of who's monitoring that. So I think last year, with everything outdoors for the most part, it ended up being a non-issue. But maybe we can frame it as, I like, I think the such as is good, right? It's giving an example of mitigation measures And then maybe if Mr. Benson wants to, or if we can get him to weigh in on some of the protocols, if he feels it would be helpful to have them in here to refer back to, so that all of the staff are using them consistently. We
The
can.
staff? Oh, you mean having the students use them? The staff having the students.
Right. Yeah. Just because I know he knows certainly.
Oh yeah.
You know,
No,
he's but to make sure that there's no
absolutely.
question from
No, as the
anybody
department
working with
chair,
the
right. That's his
students.
responsibility. And he's very serious about it.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so then why don't we'll just keep this in for now, and if we want to add something else later, we can always add something else later as well. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, it does. I absolutely agree that if it's outdoors, it's kind of a whole different ball game, so to speak. But there will be times when it needs to be indoors. That's why I'm wondering if it makes sense, I mean, to have a discussion with Jeff about maybe having those masks available for youngsters when they're indoors. You wouldn't necessarily expect every child to be bringing 2 masks or 3 masks to school. They're supposed to bring 2 anyway, 3 to school every day in case they have to use one for instrumental music. And it wouldn't
Right.
mean
No,
that,
if you want, I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry, but I did. I'm sorry.
yes,
Go
you did.
ahead.
It's okay.
No, I was just going to say to keep you from that line of thinking. If you want the slotted masks, we will provide them for the students.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is that
We don't have to worry about, having them to have 2 different kinds or whatever. We just provide them.
Well, I'm just wondering if we had some available as an option in case they do. I know that they were outdoors even when some people thought it was a bit of a stretch to be outdoors, and that I really commend Jeff and his staff for, because that is absolutely what's safest for students and staff, obviously. But it would be good to have those just as an additional layer, as you put it, in case they do have to be indoors. And as I mentioned last time, I'm really hopeful. I know we have at least 3 feet, but I'm really hopeful that if there's any possibility of being in a much larger space, if they do have to be indoors, much larger than a classroom or a regular music room, that would be important to do as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Already in place.
Okay, so I apologize for my dog in the background now. So number 7, this was what we kind of had up in the air when we were talking about hearing impaired students and later for English language learners. We had using the clear mask as an option, but then we were discussing whether we also wanted to allow for face shields. And I know we were kind of in the middle of that discussion. So I don't know if with time to think about it, what we would like to do about that. If anyone has any thoughts on face shields for students.
Well, I mean, the fact that the CDC does not recommend them, and that there appears to be quite a bit of quite new research about the fact that face shields actually can create a greater risk to other people in the area, around the person using the face shield. I'm uncomfortable with that as a mitigation measure, unless I know there are kind of closed face shields. You see them on medical people, where you don't have all the gaps. And I guess it's different materials. You have the sort of plastic, the plexiglass in front, but then you have like soft, breathable materials around. If there were something like that available, that would possibly work. But given the new research about face shields, if we're, yes, providing some protection for the wearer, but less protection for other people in the environment, including the instructors, I don't know that that's an ideal situation. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not an ideal situation.
May I ask a clarifying question? Are you talking about wearing a shield instead of a mask?
Right.
Yes.
You have an issue with
Yes.
someone wearing a mask and a shield?
No, not at all.
Okay,
Oh,
because
no.
that's typically what our shield wearers are doing. So I just wanted to clarify.
Those are adults, right? But
Yes.
This is
this is
specifically for students who
for the
maybe
students.
for yeah, for hearing impaired students, for English language learners, where you want to see their lips. And so, you know, we had either clear masks or we had these face shields that wrap around the side of the face. We allowed that from last year. I don't know if we still want to allow that as an option or not.
Right. Anybody who has a mask, they're already providing the protection that the mask provides. So the face shield is not going to create greater risk for other people. No, I'm talking
I just
specifically
wanted
for
to
the
clarify
students.
that for anyone
No,
watching.
not for staff, for the students. It was staff who
Mhm,
wore the mask plus the face shield at times. And that is an additional layer of protection for the person wearing the face shield. But if the person has a mask, they're not creating more risk to others. It's really a dilemma, but it's really difficult to say we will provide some protection for the child who's not able to wear a mask, perhaps because they're hearing impaired or whatever, but providing that in protection could create greater risk to the teacher working with them or to the other students in the room. So I don't really know what the solution is. I had said I'd try to look into it. And as I said, the only thing I could even come up with, I have seen these medical people wear shields that have soft coverings around the edges so that you don't have the gaps, which is the source, of course, of the risk to others.
If I may just add in that today I was walking around and I saw, you know, some staff and some students with the clear face masks, but
yes, those are fine.
Right.
yeah.
But no shields. I haven't seen anyone with shields on yet.
Yeah, we have not, we provided those clear masks and I'm not aware of someone using a shield instead of that. I can look into it further, but we definitely use those clear masks and that was extremely successful.
If I may, I don't want to put anybody in the spot, but I do know that Teresa is you know, appears that she's tuned in right now. She's on the attendees list. Would it be appropriate to invite her to maybe weigh in on this and give us feedback to figure out if this is even an issue that we need to continue to discuss, or if it turned out to be a non-issue?
She is a panelist, but unless she is focused on this conversation right now, she may not know to unmute. There she is.
Hi, how are you? No, so I have been tuning in. It wasn't so much an issue last year, but in part because we were also doing the hybrid. And when our hearing impaired students were on the screen, we were using closed captioning a lot. So we really had minimal difficulty throughout the year, particularly with our hearing impaired population. The clear masks are helpful, and Jen, thank you to you and all the parents who've been making them. I distributed them to multiple schools today for pre.
And they're not easy to make, just so people know. We really appreciate the effort there.
Yeah, I have, well, not to get too far off track, but I do have some, I have some that people had done the kind of the hard work of prepping late last year for larger sizes, so I can get larger ones to you over the next couple of weeks as well.
That's awesome.
So more to come.
So people, as I went around the buildings today, certainly there are some kids and staff who are wearing the clear masks. I know there was some issues with the fogging, but I think people have figured out different ways to mitigate that. Caroline, I agree that the shield itself, the concern is to having any gaps.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that we need to change what we were doing. And I think in some cases, if the clear mask wasn't working for people, they were able to wear a regular mask and it seemed to be fine. So I don't know that we need to really change anything with what we were doing last year.
So then
That's
why
great
don't
to
we,
hear.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Caroline.
I was just gonna say, then we could just take that out as a mitigation measure, as a potential mitigation
Yeah,
measure.
and if something comes up and we need to add it back in, we can always discuss that later. But for the meantime, I'll take that out. I'll make the changes that we discussed tonight and get them to Lynn, and then we'll be done with them for now until something changes and we need to change them again.
And we'll pivot.
Yeah.
Like we always are. Sorry for using that word, Leisha.
So Jackie, does it need to move to the 9th?
I mean, I don't think so. I think we can just approve them as
amended.
with the edits we discussed tonight, because all I'm really doing is taking out that language for clear face masks
All right.
and everything else we've discussed.
Do you want to make that motion?
Sure, I'm gonna motion to approve the face covering guidelines with the edits as discussed tonight.
Have a
DeLuca,
second?
second.
Roll call vote.
O'Neill, yes.
Durant, yes.
DeLuca, yes.
Wiseman, yes.
Star, yes.
Excellent. And then did we need to do anything with travel guidelines tonight?
Well, they are in the playbook presentation. If you want to consider them, discuss them, make changes to them when we go over the playbook, that might be
Okay.
best, because then I'll have it actually displayed.
Okay. All right. So then we'll move on to item 5, which is discussion of return to school playbook. Dr. Cabral.
Thank you. Chrissy Pruitt is going to help me by showing this presentation while I go over it. I will say it's a lengthy playbook. I will work to highlight the differences from last year, most notably the protocols, because now the added variables of vaccinated versus unvaccinated obviously creates many different versions. I've also updated the travel guidance and the glossary and some of the links and updates and resources. So I will go over this. Like I said, it is lengthy. However, I believe it's extremely important to get your feedback. This is not a final. This is looking for your support for this to be published. Obviously, I would like to publish it as soon as possible. I will say the fact that it is delayed to this point is not something that we consider best practice. And certainly we had it out sooner last year. Unfortunately, we have been getting late information from DESE and DPH and literally got the last piece of information we have, which isn't even everything, yesterday at 3 p.m. So we have not been able to present this for your approval to this point, but we will get this out to all students and staff as soon as you feel that it is publishable and you agree with its content. It is a live document. I'll explain that a little bit as we go further into it, because as we learned last year, there are things that we can do to try to keep confusion at a minimum. One of them is to not have documents that may have many iterations available in hard copy only, because then people may have the iteration that isn't most up to date, and that's not very helpful. So this will be a live document, and I encourage everybody to keep this link handy as a live document as opposed to printing it out. Certainly if you do print it out, that's fine, but you can see it says on this very first slide, updated September 1st. So this is updated as of today, or as of 5:30 today, 5:25. It changes frequently, and I'm constantly adding information to it. So it would be important, especially if you are looking for some very critical information, like what to do and who to contact under certain circumstances, a COVID positive test or symptoms or what the symptoms are. Certainly if it's of that nature, you're going to want to open the link, or you're going to want to contact your school nurse or school principal for the best information, okay? So the next slide just, excuse me, indicates that I prepared this deck and have gone through every slide of it with the Director of Health and Community Services and the EPS nursing staff, who have both given me points of input. Then those changes have been made. This has also been presented to the cabinet and to the executive team, and everyone has an understanding of what the contents are. So prior to this being published, we are still in a position that we can guide people because we all have this as a reference, but before it is being published to the public, we of course want to get the school committee approval for it. Okay, I'll get started. The next slide talks about the framework. I will paraphrase most of this because you were sent this. You do have this link, school committee. So anything you were not able to go through to this point, you certainly have the opportunity to do that. And like I said, it's a live document. So if you have suggestions to make this evening, I can make those changes this evening. If you have changes that you notice after this evening, I can still go into the live document and make those changes. If you see an error or something like that, anything that would need to be deliberated, it's a content that you would like to deliberate to change. Obviously, that would only be done in open session. So this, again, to paraphrase, the first bullet says basically what is included here. We take into account the most current information that we have, both medical and scientific, and it discusses the exposures, transmission, incubation periods, vaccination information, data points, and so on. The EHCS, which you see above, is the Easton Health and Community Services Department. That is the department. I think in last year's playbook, I had BOH for Board of Health. Certainly the Easton Health and Community Services Department works for the Board of Health, and the Director of Health and Community Services reports to the Board of Health. And so when the director and I are in direct communication about the contents of this, she is representing the Board of Health. I am representing the school committee. So de facto, this is a cooperation between Board of Health and school committee, but EHCS will be used throughout. We will take into consideration both quantitative and qualitative information, and you see examples there. This will also include current available data. So when people make use of data that is at the national level or even the level of the Commonwealth, we will be using Easton's information. And we're putting all our resources at the end of this document. And the final bullet says that we will continue to make adjustments, and in extreme circumstances, if a classroom, team, grade level, or a whole district have to go completely remote, we will, of course, move in that direction under the guidance of DESE. So if the commissioner or the governor were to, again, make the district or under their guidance, we would have to make a classroom or something of that nature fully remote, then we would make adjustments to this playbook. That does not mean remote learning for an individual. That does not mean any hybrid learning. This is strictly if we are directed to shut down a classroom, school, etc. The next slide discusses the purpose, my favorite P word, the purpose of the playbook. The first bullet, this makes up our response protocols for three things. And you're going to see these three things repeated many times in this presentation, because I want to make it clear that even though there are many slides and a lot of information to this playbook, it is in essence discussing three things. What to do if someone is positive for COVID, a close contact to someone who's positive, or is symptomatic of COVID-like symptoms. So positive, close contact, or symptomatic. There's a lot of slides to describe just those three things, but in essence, that is what this playbook intends to discuss. The second bullet explains that it's live, and I spoke about that prior. Please check it regularly for updates. The third bullet, of course, no playbook replaces direct engagement with the school department or the Department of Public Health. So please reach out or call for further clarification. The next one is that the playbook's intended for general best practices, but there are always unique situations because we're dealing with people and those are very unique. In the event of a confirmed case, then we of course will provide specific information to all those affected. We do not expect people to rely on this playbook alone for information. All right, what to expect when there are positive cases? Very similar to last year. We have thought ahead about how we will communicate this information. Some specifics vary depending on the situation, but there are standard steps for, again, those three situations. A person who's symptomatic, a person who's confirmed positive, or a close contact. If a family does not receive direct communication, then their child has not been identified as positive, symptomatic, or a close contact. We will convey information, of course, as needed. Then I have yes, Caroline.
I am sorry to interrupt, but
no, I'm glad. I appreciate. I should have said, please jump in with questions or comments.
Well, I was thinking it didn't make sense to wait till the end of
No,
the 50 pages to go back to page 5.
Not at all.
So I don't know if you're interested in any kind of so on bullet number 2. I think that's what when you have is close contact with an affected person. I didn't know if that really meant an infected person, or when you say affected, exactly what you mean by affected. Is that a crazy question? I mean, it's you have, depending on situation, there are some standard steps that will be taken if someone in our school community is symptomatic, is a close contact with an affected person or tests positive. But
infected is definitely more specific, and I'll change it to that.
Okay, and the second thing is sort of the sub bullet number 1. This is purely grammatical, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
You have if someone displays symptoms, steps will be taken to evaluate symptoms, separate from others, clean and disinfect, and when appropriate, recommended testing. I would just say recommend testing. Or steps will be taken. I mean,
actually, there should be a comma after appropriate.
Okay.
And then it should be recommend.
Recommends. Okay.
So I take your correction and I up you 1 correction.
Yes, you are. Thank you. Okay, that's 2 and 3, and then. Okay, what is the difference then when a member of the EPS community is confirmed positive for COVID-19? Now, if someone's confirmed positive, that means even if they're asymptomatic, they have COVID-19.
Correct.
So moving to the next one, when it says a member of the EPS community is confirmed to have COVID-19, they're identified as, those individuals identified as close contacts will be notified, but it almost sounds like there's 2 different things, like a confirmed positive and a have COVID-19. I think.
Oh, okay. So
because there's slightly different. Well, there's slightly different sort of associated.
Okay. So for the third hollow bullet, is confirmed positive for COVID-19. You're saying is more consistent.
Well, confirmed to have. I mean, they're kind of confirmed positive. They do have it.
Right.
So they're the same thing. Right. It's just that I didn't know if you were making a differentiation between testing positive and then maybe you meant somehow a symptomatic person, which I don't think you are making that distinction. I think
I actually am. There are 3 things that we're going to talk about here: a person who's positive, a person who's a close contact, or a person who's symptomatic with an unknown positivity status. But I think what you're saying is a verbiage issue. You're saying in the second one, we say when they're confirmed positive for COVID-19. The third one is for a close contact. That's not for a confirmed positive person. So I think you're saying use the same language as the bullet above, which is the same thing, but it's a language issue. EPS community is confirmed positive for COVID-19. Is that what you're saying?
Well, a little bit, yeah, because I do think sometimes people confuse, well, first of all, of course, you've got this SARS-CoV-2, that's the virus, then COVID-19 is the illness. But, when we test for COVID-19. So it's very, we just have to, I'm just thinking that we should be as consistent as possible, because you could almost imply from this that if someone tests positive, they don't necessarily have to be identified. There don't necessarily have to be close contacts identified.
Well, they may not have any close contacts.
Oh, true, of course. But I mean, you would inquire.
Yes.
So, okay, yeah, I just thought a little bit more, I know I'm being extremely.
That's okay. I'm looking for your feedback.
Aggravatingly picky here, but I didn't get through the whole thing. You'll be happy to know I only got.
No, I appreciate
part of the way
the
through. So. Go ahead.
So is that does that satisfy your question, or should I?
Yes, no, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Next slide, thank you, is the beginning of our glossary, where hopefully I have clarified some questions people may have. Please check this if there's something in the playbook that you are not sure what it may mean. I put 3 things here because many of these terms have very specific meanings and some of them have changed. For example, the definition of close contact, for example, but I'll talk about some other things as well. So it's extremely important that people refer to these. I will highlight the ones that have changed or are important, but certainly if you have comments on any others, let me know. Asymptomatic, cohort is a little bit different. Cohort is just a consistent, stable group. Last year, we had cohort A and cohort B, which represented 2 groups of students attending school at different times, or cohort AB. We also had students, particularly at the high school and the middle school who were, at the intermediate school and the middle school who were scheduled in cohorts. This is a little bit different. This just means a group of students or staff who are consistently together, and the fact that we will endeavor to keep specific groups together whenever we can. There are just some groups that by definition operate as a type of cohort. For example, a first grade class is a group of students who interact with each other on a regular basis. But they have limited interaction with other groups. And so it's a slightly different definition than last year. Close personal contact is quite different. This, or a couple things are different. First of all, it is still, and I talk about this later again, but I think it's worth repeating. Close contacts, to be a quote unquote CPC, close personal contact, that would be an individual who has been within 6 feet of a COVID-19 positive person while indoors only for at least 15 minutes within a 24-hour period. So that's the first difference. If they're within 6 feet outside, they are not considered a close contact. Another thing is that last year, we considered brief transitory interactions, a teacher going around to students' desks and perhaps checking in with a student 15 or 16 times a day. And we counted that accumulation to be over 15 minutes. That is no longer part of the definition of a close contact. So any brief transitory interactions, a teacher ties a youngster's shoe, goes and answers a question at a high schooler's desk, they do not any longer need to add those minutes together for a total of 15 minutes. We're finding that there needs to be a more sustained, and this is a CDC guidance. This is not, when I say we, I don't mean we determine this on our own, that there needs to be more sustained interaction for that close contact to occur. Close contacts can be anyone who is exposed to a person that is COVID positive 2 days before they tested. Doesn't mean 2 days before they get the results, 2 days before they tested, or 2 days before their symptoms began, if they have symptoms. Of course, we know that many people can be asymptomatic and still be positive. And then anyone who's positive, who has had COVID-19 and is fully recovered in the last 90 days is also not a close contact. There are other exemptions, but they come on a slide that is literally for exemptions of close contacts, which is coming up. Community transmission is when, in our case, this would be the schools. It's when we find that a member of the school community has acquired COVID-19 through contact with another member of the school community. And a confirmed case is someone, as Caroline said earlier, someone who has tested positive for COVID. Okay, next slide is contact tracing. This is the process of determining who those contacts are. COVID-19, the incubation period still remains 2 to 14 days. The infectious period I just described of a person is the 2 days prior to the test or 2 days prior to symptoms. And isolation is still the process of separating someone who is COVID positive. That is still 10 days. They can exit on the 11th day if they are symptom-free. However, it's important to note people with severely immunocompromised conditions should isolate for at least 20 days. Next is quarantine. And again, this is quite different from last year, but there are a few slides on this upcoming. So this is taking a stab at a concise definition, but there are all of the protocols for quarantining are coming up. This is when we separate and restrict interaction between people who are close contacts. So isolation is when someone is positive. Quarantine is when someone has been a close contact. If a person is fully vaccinated and asymptomatic, they're fully vaccinated, which is 2 weeks after their last dose of the corresponding vaccine, and they have no symptoms whatsoever, they will not likely need to quarantine. But we will discuss that later in the protocols. They will, however, be asked to make sure they wear a mask all the time, even outside when around other people during that period. They will maintain at least 3 feet distances from others, and they will monitor for a full 14 days. Everyone, regardless of whether they quarantine or not, if they come in contact with someone, must self-monitor for any COVID-like symptoms for a full 14 days and let us know immediately, as well as their medical provider, for the appropriate guidance if they do come down with any of the symptoms. Again, there are slides on symptoms later. If the close contact is not vaccinated, but they are asymptomatic and they don't have any symptoms, they may qualify to be able to stay in school while we test them. That's called a test and stay program, and that information is coming. Response protocols are the protocols that are in this document that ultimately, if not this iteration, ultimately you will review and approve them.
Dr. Cabral, a quick question.
Yes.
Paragraph 2
yes.
and paragraph 3 are slightly, I mean, I know that paragraph 3 clarifies everything very well, but I'm wondering if at the end of paragraph 2, you should have something like with exceptions noted below or whatever, because the first sentence is anyone who has been in close contact with someone who has COVID must stay home for 14 days, but then you, of course, enumerate the exceptions to that. I'm just wondering if at the end of the second paragraph, you just say with exceptions noted below or something like that, something along those lines. Too.
Okay,
Does that make
thank you.
sense? Okay, thank you.
Yep. Next slide. These are the symptoms. And there's a link here to the daily screener, which we will continue from last year. Anyone who exhibits these symptoms before school should not report to school. We did have many cases where a student presented in school with symptoms that they have had all morning or they claimed to have had the evening before. And we cannot stress enough how important it is for a staff member to stay home or for a parent to keep their child home if they exhibit any of those symptoms and call us for guidance. These symptoms are slightly changed from the CDC. Unvaccinated individuals and any close contacts, whether they're vaccinated or not, If they have any of these symptoms, the top 5 that are in bold or the bottom that are not in bold, if they have any of those, they should follow the testing and quarantine protocols. However, if a vaccinated person who is not a close contact has symptoms that are in bold, the 5 at the top, then they should seek guidance on testing protocols. Okay, so that of course is slightly different than last year because we now have vaccinated individuals. So the CDC has differentiated the symptoms. Anyone who's unvaccinated and has the symptoms listed anywhere in these 2 lists should seek guidance. Anyone who's vaccinated should seek guidance if they have one of the top 5 that are in bold. Next slide. This is where we start to talk about the test and stay protocol. Please note on the left in red, we did apply to utilize this protocol, but we don't have the tests yet. We have attended the trainings and we have discussed this with all of our nursing and administration staff, but we don't have it yet. So even if this protocol is published tomorrow, it's important that people know we will implement this as soon as possible, but we have to have the tests on hand in order to do it. So what is test and stay? Test and stay. Again, it will make more sense when we get to the protocol that utilizes test and stay, but it's a shallow nasal swab sample. Some people may have taken that. It's intended to be an individual test. This is not pooled testing. We are told that students 5 and up can self-administer with close supervision from an adult. This is when, I said earlier, excuse me, an asymptomatic, unvaccinated person could potentially use this protocol to remain in school instead of having to quarantine. They have no symptoms, they're not vaccinated, they're a close contact. We do have this coming imminently as an option. What it is a Binax Now rapid antigen test where we receive the results within 15 minutes. And if someone we determine is a close contact is in school, and they're in school, we can administer this test each day for 5 days. Now the protocol is 7 days long, but the assumption, of course, is that 2 of those will always be a weekend and testing will not be taking place. So if a child out of the 7-day protocol or a staff member has 5 negative Binax tests at school, they can remain in school during all of the testing days. They can participate in school-related activities only during the testing days. They're not allowed to participate in outside activities like comm rec, dancing, karate, etc. They can, after the 5th negative test and the 7th day, if they have developed no symptoms, they can then continue to remain in school, continue their activities, but they still have to self-assess for the full 14 days. And if they develop symptoms, they need to let us know. An important thing here, which again, you're going to see a couple of times, is that we do not have testing available on weekends. So if a student who's involved in extracurriculars, whether an activity, performance, athletics, right now, if they were in a test and stay protocol, they're tested, say, on a Wednesday, a Thursday, a Friday, they can participate in school activities on those days. Saturday and Sunday are part of the protocol, but there is not currently testing for weekends. Even once we get the Binax Now tests, that is going to take a bit of time. They test again on Monday and Tuesday, then they're all set. But during the Saturday and Sunday, they would not be able to participate. They can only participate on testing days when they get a negative result. If they get a positive result or exhibit symptoms at any time, the protocol stops and they go home. Michelle?
I'm just, if I heard you correctly, that they're not allowed to do outside activities. It seems to me that's impossible to monitor.
It may be, but that is the DESI protocols. We can't change that. That's what it is. If it were to be reported and we were to find out about that, then we would probably limit their activities in school as well. But other than that, you're right. We're not going to go and check to see if they went to dancing or check to see if they went to ComRec, but these are the guidelines.
Thank you.
Well,
Sure.
I would add that theoretically, we can change the DESI protocol if it's just recommended. I don't think it's mandated. This is a tough call because I know how incredibly important the school activities are to our students. But there's a lot of evidence that most of the infections that did occur among children over the past year were something like 60% plus were basically result of exposure during athletic and other activities, not so much in the classroom.
That is
So-
definitely true in Easton as well. And a
Yeah.
good number of that was outside activities that were non-school sponsored events.
Well, I guess I'll support this for now, but I think if we do find out that that continues to be one of the largest sources of infection, even in school activities, that we might need to, for a youngster who's involved in test and stay, we might need to kind of take another look at the outside activity piece.
You certainly could do that.
I mean, outside school activity piece. I mean, I said
No, I
that wrong.
understand.
We already are clear about outside activities. I agree with Michelle. There's no way to monitor that. We have to hope that people will be honest and they're kind of on the honor system for that. But I meant school athletic and co-curricular.
No, I understand.
activities.
Yep.
Yeah.
I understand.
Thanks.
Jennifer, sorry.
So I noticed on the DESI flow chart, which
Yes.
does a pretty good job, actually. I was like, oh, that's much better than that 12-page Word doc that they sent out. They do reference take-home testing. So is that something that we're hoping will be available? I mean, obviously we don't even have the in-school testing.
Right.
That's, I would imagine, further down the road, but is that something that we are anticipating and be, possibly able to use to?
That is coming a little bit later in the presentation. It's called
Okay.
Emed.
Yep.
It's not the test and stay protocol. It's called Emed. And we, like you said, we don't even have the in testing yet. So the home testing, we have to make all kinds of protocols, guidelines, parameters, people they report to, and we haven't even started that yet. So that will not, if that does get in place, it will not be immediately. So when Binax is in place, that doesn't necessarily mean that Emed is in place. We have to wait for that, unfortunately. And those are different. Yeah, those are different tests.
Great, thanks.
Sure. The other thing that is important to know, again, per DESI, is that we can only test students who are identified as close contacts in school. So if someone reports that their child was a close contact, again, as a result of a AAU team or a dance academy or a family member, and it was outside of school, we cannot make them part of the test and stay protocol. So those are the DESI guidelines for this. And we are only going to be getting a certain number of tests. And so we need them for students who may be exposed in school. So that is an important differentiation. Testing for our purposes is a PCR. If a child is asked to get a PCR test to get a test until further notice, it would be a PCR test, not a home test, a PCR test. For us in school, the school personnel will supervise the administration of the Binax now here at school. And that is a rapid antigen. But for purposes of at-home testing, if someone is told that they need to get a test beyond the Binax that we have administered, it needs to be a PCR test. Again, until further notice. There's also, so there's test and stay with those Binax tests. There's also symptomatic testing, which I'll again talk about in a moment. And the third type of testing is pooled testing. We will not be doing pooled testing. The feedback we received from parents was that there were just too many parents who were not willing to let their child participate in pooled testing. And pooled testing is completely invalid if you do not have a significant number of people in the pool, in the cohort, in the pool. So if you have 25 children in a classroom and 15 of them are not testing, you do a pool test for 10, it comes back positive, everybody thinks that's great and the classroom is safe. Well, that's not true because more than half the children haven't been tested. So that would be invalid for us. And until we have different feedback from parents, we are unable to utilize the pooled testing effectively.
I think you meant negative, right? Everyone comes back negative.
Oh,
You said if everyone comes back, if it comes back positive.
oh, if everybody comes back negative, sorry. Yeah. If everyone comes back negative, if it comes back positive, then again, everyone has to go for individual testing, and those 15 children who didn't test at all still have no idea where they're at. So it's just not, it doesn't work here for that purpose. Symptomatic testing, I'll talk about in a moment. Vaccinated individual definition is there. I think most people are aware of that, but please refer to it if not. Then we've got the acronyms that are used throughout the document that I will now use as we go forward. So if I refer to Department of Elementary Secondary Ed, I'll say DESE. If I'm referring to a close contact, I'll say CPC. If I'm referring to a primary care physician, I'll say PCP, etc. But they are all here. Next is just an important disclaimer. It's important for people to know there are some things they shouldn't keep reading this playbook for. If they have trouble breathing, persistent pain, confusion, ability to stay awake, bluish lips or face, please do not read this playbook for guidance. This is a 911 call immediately. This isn't all the possible symptoms, but anything certainly beyond what we noted earlier should just call your medical provider immediately, or 911. Do not wait to discuss this with somebody at school. Certainly not on a non-school day also. And now we have the response protocols, and these are the situational guidance for the 3 situations. If someone is positive, a close contact, or symptomatic. Okay, I told you you're going to hear that a lot. So here is the flow chart of the order that a parent or guardian would take. If you look at the red arrow in the left corner, if someone finds that their child is positive, a close contact, or symptomatic, they fail the screener or they have symptoms, they notify the school's main office. That office then notifies the principal and the school nurse immediately. If you look on the left-hand side, they communicate regularly, but the school nurse, if the student is or staff member is present, they will assess them in the health office or the medical waiting room as the symptoms indicate. If they're absent, they will call to assess the details from the parent or the patient and provide the appropriate medical advice. Then if the nurse determines that it is a potential case or knows that it's a positive case, they log on to a spreadsheet that we have that is confidential between administration and the nurses called Cases to Follow. The nurse, I was gonna say she or he, but we have all females right now. She then follows the medical protocols and advises the patient or the parent and notifies the principal. The nurse then updates the Cases to Follow and will be notified of the date that the patient can return based on the metrics that we have, and they will notify the patient of such. On the right-hand side, the principal notifies who will be contact tracing, as well as assisting the nurse or the contact tracer if necessary. The contact tracer will let the health department know of any positive cases, any unconfirmed positive cases. They will look for in the MAVEN system. The health department will look for in the MAVEN state system for positive cases. They will then identify who the close contacts are. They will update the positives and the contacts on the cases to follow spreadsheets, which are Google Docs that are in real time. They will notify the nurse for any parent contacts that the nurse has to make. They will prepare and send the notifications. We did these last year. They will do this again, and then they will update the principal, the health department, and central office. So the parent's responsibility is the red arrow. Notify the school immediately. This is the quick reference for the actions of, yes, positive, asymptomatic close contacts, or people who are symptomatic. The first one is protocol A for those who are positive. This is rather cut and dry. Mrs. Pruitt? This is rather cut and dry, and it is the same protocol as last year. If someone is positive, confirmed positive, they begin an isolation. Again, isolation is for positive, quarantine is for close contact. They have to be isolated for a minimum of 10 days from the first symptom or the positive PCR test. If they're asymptomatic, they may return to school once they've been without fever for 24 hours, they have no other symptoms, and they receive clearance from the health department or school nurse. This can be different for different people, obviously. People can be very mildly affected. Others may have to be out for longer than 10 days, but that's why we stay in touch and monitor the development of those symptoms. We do not recommend somebody take a second PCR once they're positive to show that they're negative, because we have learned, of course, that it may show that they're positive because they have the antibodies in their system, and that is not effective. So we don't recommend that. The next protocols are for close contacts who have no symptoms. I really have to stress that these are only for people with no symptoms, and this makes up 3 different protocols because, of course, now we have vaccinated and unvaccinated individuals. So the first protocol, before we get to that, excuse me, I did also add some information about how we determine close contacts. And then the next slide talks about people who are exempt from quarantining. That would include anybody who's fully vaccinated and asymptomatic. Remember, test and stay is only for people who are unvaccinated. Classroom close contacts. If an individual was masked and they were more than 3 feet apart from the infected individual, they do not need to quarantine. If they were on a bus with an infected individual, as long as they had a mask on and the windows were open, which is going to be the case in Easton, they are exempt from testing and quarantining. And those who have been positive within the last 90 days are fully recovered, and it has not been more than 90 days. They also do not have to test and quarantine. Unvaccinated people also may not have to quarantine if they do test and stay, and that's what I'll talk about in the protocols. The first protocol is certainly what we recommend. I cannot stress enough. Our primary concerns this year are the health and safety of our staff and our students, but a huge part of that is their presence in school. We all know how important that is. And so in order to keep people in school as much as we possibly can, we really recommend that people elect, if they are unvaccinated and have no symptoms, they elect to participate in the test and stay. Again, that is a 7-day process. They can stay in school throughout the process as long as they continue having negative tests. They have to wear their mask at all times, except when they eat, which they should be distanced more when that happens. They should maintain 3 feet of distance all the time. They will take a Binax Now test each day at school. And as long as they're negative, they can continue attending school. Even if they get through the 7-day period, again, they must self-monitor, or the parent must monitor the child for a full 14 days. If they develop any symptoms, then they need to consult the school immediately for guidance, and certainly a PCP for medical advice. At the bottom of this, you see part of it anyway. There is the link to the flow charts that Jen referred to earlier. All of the protocol flow charts are on that document, and so the same link is on each of these pages. So if that is a helpful visual, we certainly encourage people to take a look at that. Now, it is imperative actually that we receive written consent for every person once at the beginning of the year for participation in any kind of testing at school. We are looking for the electronic capability for this. We're waiting for it. It does exist, and DESE is sending it to us, and we will provide that. If a parent does not complete that, their child cannot participate, which is fine, but then there is a different protocol for that person. So again, once they consent at the beginning of the year, and their child can participate for both test and stay, and also if they're symptomatic. Now, it's important to note, and we do not love this idea, but we can't do anything about it. The electronic consent that we are going to receive includes all 3 types of testing. It's consent for the test and stay, the symptomatic testing, but also the pooled testing. I just explained we're not doing the pooled testing. We will note that when we send it, but we aren't able to take it off of that consent sheet. So when parents consent, they are only, I know it says pooled testing on it, but they are only consenting to symptomatic testing and test and stay when applicable. And we will note that in writing for the parents so that they know that that is the case. We are not participating in pooled testing.
Dr. Cabral, if I may,
Yes,
chime in.
please.
What the state has said is that by asking families to consent to all 3, if we ever need to implement one throughout the year, that is the benefit of having the approval already. So
Yes, but I don't want people to feel as though there's a bait and switch. If we
Correct.
were to do pool testing, we would reach out for
Yes.
consent for pooled testing.
Right. I was just going to follow up. with
That's
saying
critical.
That you know, and the other thing too that's really important that everyone notes is that if a form is not filled out electronically, we are not allowed to take verbal consent that your child can be tested. So for example, if your child is identified as a close contact and they're not vaccinated, a parent or a guardian is not able to call the school nurse and say, yes, Leisha can participate in pool testing. That is not acceptable through DESE and the Department of Public Health. And so that's just really clear, just to continue to note that.
Thank you. There will be a written option. We can send home a written document for people if they prefer that. But if someone were to call and say, yes, please have my child test so they can stay in school, if it's a test and stay, for example, we can't take verbal. They could then log on a computer and do the electronic version. But we certainly encourage anyone who intends to participate in test and stay or symptomatic testing to complete that very critical consent as soon as we send it out. All right, the next slide is the traditional protocol. If someone does not want to participate in test and stay, that's fine, but they need to quarantine for at least 7 days. They can return on day 8 only if they do not have symptoms and they get a PCR test outside of school, PCR only, on day 5 or later, and it's negative. They also have to monitor through day 14. If they have symptoms, then they have to follow a different protocol. That's protocol C, which we'll get to in a minute. If they become positive at any time, that's protocol A. We already discussed that. Protocol B3 is for someone who doesn't wish to have their child tested at all. Whether it's a symptomatic testing, a test and stay, or a PCR test outside of school. That's also perfectly fine. However, that child or that staff member would need to quarantine for at least 10 days from exposure. And again, they can return on day 11 as long as they do not have symptoms, and they must conduct the 14-day self-monitoring or monitoring of a child for symptoms. Again, if they become symptomatic at any time, they bump to protocol C. If they test positive at any time, they go up to protocol A. And you see that link there for the visual. Do you want to click on that, Mrs. Pruitt, just to show them what it looks like?
Is that pulled up there?
Yes, it is. Thank you. So protocol A just shows they've tested positive, go home. Basically, thank you, Dusty, very concise. And then it tells you when they can return on day 11 and the conditions for that. B is if they don't have symptoms and they're close contacts. You can see you follow this flow chart. It has the same information as the slide, but it's in a flow chart. If that visual is more helpful, we certainly encourage that. And then C is the flow chart for people who are symptomatic, okay, symptomatic before we know whether they're positive or negative. And we're going to talk about that slide now. But as you can see, this is a visual that if you find this helpful, please make use of it instead of the slide. Thank you, Mrs. Pruitt. So now the protocols again are for symptomatic people. So someone's got symptoms. They are consistent with COVID. We don't know if they're positive or not, and it doesn't matter if they're vaccinated or not. This is what happens. There are 2 protocols for this. The first is if they are, if they take a PCR test, if they have symptoms, they need to take a PCR test outside of school. They can come back as long as, and this is very consistent with the others, they have an improvement in their symptoms. They've been without fever for at least 24 hours and they monitor for 14 days. So this is someone who has symptoms. They go and they take a PCR test outside of school. It's negative. They can come back when their symptoms resolve. Okay. Now, if someone is symptomatic in school, we have the option of the symptomatic test, the Binax Now. That is not the end all be all though. It's a rapid test. It's not the gold standard. That helps the nurse and the school department make decisions on whether the child needs to go in the medical waiting room, needs to be dismissed, etc. Whether they get a negative or a positive test, it needs to be followed up with a PCR. But this is what they do if they get a negative PCR test. They can come back when their symptoms resolve based on the information in this slide. And the last protocol is, again, if a parent chooses not to have their child participate in any testing, Mrs. Pruitt. Thank you. Then they have to isolate at least 10 days from symptom onset, and they can return on day 11, once again, as long as the symptoms are improved. They haven't had a fever for 24 hours without fever reducing medication. So that is not different from last year at all. Again, parents always have an option of whether they want to test or not. It just leads them to a different protocol and a different number of days for quarantine, essentially.
I just want
Questions
to
about the-
apologize for the delay. The computer is running slowly over here. I think I
No,
have too many
that's fine.
tabs open.
It's fine. You can't have more than I do, so it's fine. All right. Any questions about the protocols? Again, these have been completely vetted with the nurses and the Department of Public Health. They are in agreement with these protocols completely. This is straight from DESE and DPH. Any questions about them or comments? Okay, we're cruising right along here. Then we get to in-person instruction. I can go straight through a couple of these slides. First is what is test and stay. So if you want to review those for more details, but I have said everything on this slide so far. Some of the highlights: they must be asymptomatic and unvaccinated in order to participate. We have to have the written consent. The school personnel has to observe the administration of the test. The staff members, the student or staff member needs to be a CPC from school, not from a relative or a friend outside of school or a team that is a non-school team. Also per DESE, no student or staff member may participate in any activities including athletics, during the test and stay protocol until it's successfully completed. And then there's a slide on the Emed that Jennifer asked me about, which is a possible exception, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Any binacs now? Sorry.
Well, I just had a quick question. I thought you said they could participate in school sports or extracurricular activities.
They can. They can. I have to fix that. We were first told they weren't, so I fixed it in most places. I will fix that, but there's also a clarification on the Emed slide about how they can participate on the weekends. So yes, if they're testing on a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, they can participate unless or until the school committee feels differently, as Caroline noted. But for now, they can participate on testing days. They can't participate on non-testing days. So I'll clarify that. That is slide number 30. Okay, thank you. Any positive results for binacs has to be has to be followed by a PCR. It's informative, it helps parents, but it isn't the end all. You could get a false positive, and so we encourage people to get a PCR test for verification. And if any patient shows a positive result or has symptoms, the protocol stops and they leave school and move to one of the other protocols. And that's pretty much it. The next one is the symptomatic testing. This is if a student is experiencing symptoms before they come to school, please do not send your child to school. And I did accentuate that before, and I'm doing it again. And a staff member shouldn't come to school if they're experiencing symptoms before school. However, if they are in school experiencing symptoms, they will be dismissed. But if they want to participate in the symptomatic testing, they can, to help inform the parent and the health office of how to treat the patient. It must be followed, they must have written consent in order to participate, and it should be followed up with a PCR. Anybody who is symptomatic, whether we determine that they are positive or not, they will not be allowed to participate in activities until they are cleared to return to school. So a student that is symptomatic and unable to be in school may not participate in any kind of school activity, sports, club, anything after school or on weekends until they are cleared to return to school. Again, it is not mandatory to participate in testing. If testing is not done, they will then move to protocol C2, which we talked about. Next slide just repeats those symptoms. I think it's important that we repeat them. So I put it here as well as in the definitions for quick reference. The next slide, what is Emed testing? This is what Jen brought up earlier. Because staff and students must be identified as a CPC only in school, and because they can only participate in school-sponsored activities until it's completed successfully. This is the wording I need to move to the other slide, Michelle, that you noted. They're not supposed to participate in non-school activities, but as was said earlier, we can't necessarily monitor that. We have to hope people will abide by the guidance. Emed is a test that may be provided to the school at some point in the future that has the potential to be used on weekends for athletes or performers or people who are involved in extracurricular or co-curricular clubs while they are in the test and stay 7-day protocol to allow them to continue to participate in those activities on non-school days when they're not tested by school staff. However, I just really want to note, we do not currently have that available. That will definitely not be available until after the symptomatic and test and stay tests are well underway and the nursing staff feels confident that they are able to accomplish that effectively. At that point, we will try to get the Emed tests and we will try to adopt some sort of protocol for weekend activities. With that said, I understand it's disappointing, but this is a vast improvement over last year where the most number of days someone will stay out for being in close contact is 2, and that would be on a weekend. So we're very hopeful we will have this in place before any extended holidays or vacation periods. So the most should be 2 days. But again, we are at the mercy of several factors, including receiving the actual tests, being able to train people, having a protocol in place, and we're really trying to get the test and stay and symptomatic testing off the ground in school first. So just want to really over accentuate that. I know I'm kind of beating that horse, but it's extremely important. The masking requirements is next. We have gone over that. Everyone is required to wear it, everyone. It's not just 5 and up. We don't have 2-year-olds here. Parents should provide masks in alignment with the school committee masking policy and guidelines. We have them if they don't have them. This is important to note that medical or behavioral exemptions noted by DESE must be in the form of documentation, a note, a medical note, from the primary care physician, the PCP currently treating the student for a condition that the provider deems is impossible for the child to wear a face mask and creates the necessity for exploring accommodations. We will not accept non-medical documentation. We will not accept documentation from a provider that doesn't work with the child, has never seen the child, is not the primary care physician of the child, is not a physician, and is not treating the child for a condition. So that's an extremely important note because people have asked and I've been sending them this guidance, but it will be in the playbook as well. And then you can see the rest we have gone over. It will, the second bullet from the bottom, reasonable accommodations to ensure compliance. This is a compliance issue in our view. This is not primarily a disciplinary issue. This is a compliance issue. We want to accommodate legitimate needs, medical issues. And so we want to work with children and staff in order to do that. However, if we are unable to determine that there is a medical condition and we don't have medical documentation that is appropriate, and it may become a behavior or a disciplinary situation. At that point, it would include progressive discipline. Our code of conduct always does. That is different at every level, depending on developmental level and unique cases. We don't have a blanket policy for discipline. But it could go up to and include exclusion from school. At that point, we need to determine why is this happening. And again, if it's a medical reason, we may be able to come up with reasonable accommodations. If it is not, and it is someone that is refusing to wear a mask for a non-medical reason, this issue is important enough that we would then have to consider, why is this parent not allowing their child to be in school with a mask? And that then becomes a different issue. That becomes the potential, in the most extreme cases, of an educational neglect issue. And we have certain mandated requirements for that kind of an issue. That's certainly extreme. We did not have one medical exemption request last year. And unless someone has developed a medical condition since then, we don't anticipate receiving any this year. And again, there is not a vehicle for a religious mask exemption. Religious exemptions are for vaccinations that are injected into the body. So it would be a medical exemption only. And then how would students then complete their work? Well, according to the Commissioner of Education, we may not provide remote instruction to any student because it will not count for time on learning. So it's not that we cannot, quote unquote, do remote learning. It's just that it won't count for time on learning. If something doesn't count for time on learning, we have to make up that day. So someone could participate in remote learning all day long, but then they have to come back and make up the day in June or during a vacation or a Saturday in extreme circumstances. While they are in quarantine or isolation, as I noted earlier, they may not participate in in-person activities, including athletics or school. The third bullet, this is straight from the DESE guidance, that again says that it won't count toward learning time hours. It can only, in the limited instance, be used during isolation or quarantine, if schools have the ability to do that. We do not have the staff in place that we did last year for cohorts. Last year, because we were in cohorts, we had half the number of students at any given time, and we could reassign staff to be facilitators and many other roles that are necessary for the remoting in or hybrid learning. Therefore, EPS does not have the ability to provide remote learning. And so we will abide by the DESE requirement that states if schools are not able to allow students to join their schedule remotely, then we will adopt a policy consistent with other absences and provide work for students that can be completed while at home. Sadly, we have had students out for the 5 or 7 or 11 days of these protocols in the past for many other reasons, whether it's an illness, whether it's an accident, whether it is broken bones or surgery or what have you. And we have always successfully provided the makeup work to those students and gotten them back on track. And we have been told that this should be handled in the exact same way. So staff is already familiar with this process that has been used forever in public schools, and they will continue to do so. Now we get to the travel guidance that, I'm sorry, I can't remember who brought it up earlier, but we are strongly recommending this for all students and staff. I am proposing that it is not a mandate, but the school committee certainly has the ability to make this a mandate if you choose. This is strongly recommended. The CDC recommends. We are strongly recommending this for all students and staff. First is domestic travel. This is for fully vaccinated individuals only, that during travel, they wear a mask appropriately. They have to on all planes, buses, trains, etc., and public transportation now anyway. That they follow all local and state recommendations and requirements, and that when there may be a case where they are in a crowded setting with a high number of people who may not or are likely not vaccinated, small children, for example, that they wear a mask to avoid being in close contact. After travel, they are encouraged to self-monitor for COVID-19 symptoms, stay home and get tested if they develop symptoms, and follow all local recommendations. So if they have been fully vaccinated and don't have symptoms, or they have had COVID in the last 90 days and are fully recovered, they really just have to wear a mask, be mindful of being around others, and self-monitor when they return for symptoms. Now, if they are not vaccinated, for unvaccinated individuals, they are, again, recommended to get a test 1 to 3 days before the trip for domestic travel. While traveling, wear a mask, be mindful not to be around people who also be around crowds, and to maintain physical distance at 6 feet whenever possible. Wash hands, use hand sanitizer. After traveling, get another test 3 to 5 days after travel, and stay home and self-quarantine for a full 7 days, even if they test negative. If they're positive, obviously isolate for the full time, and if they don't get tested at all, stay home for 10 days. Again, we are recommending this. It is not a mandate for domestic travel, but we are recommending this per CDC recommendations. There is an exemption from last year for unvaccinated people. If they travel out of state for less than 24 hours, they do not need to follow the protocols, the recommended protocols. Now, for international travel, again, it's strongly recommended for vaccinated individuals before traveling. Really check the COVID-19 situation in your destination. We have a link there that is updated regularly. During traveling, wear a mask. Avoid areas where high numbers of people that may be unvaccinated. Again, follow all the recommendations at your destination. Before coming back, right now, all passengers who are coming by air to the United States, even citizens and vaccinated people, are currently required to have a negative COVID-19 test result no more than 3 days before travel. So that is the expectation. After travel, again, recommended that they take a test 3 to 5 days after and self-monitor for any symptoms. Unvaccinated people, we strongly recommend, as does the CDC, that unvaccinated individuals do not travel internationally at this time. But if they must, they should test before they leave. Make sure they check for the requirements at their destination, wear a mask, stay 6 feet away from other people, wash hands and sanitize regularly. This continues on the next slide. Before coming back, they will, the next slide, Mrs. Pruitt. Before coming back, they will need to test if they're coming by air. But after they return home, again, it's suggested they test 3 to 5 days after, and the rest of that is the same recommendation. So before we move on, did you want to discuss the travel recommendations? Jen.
Just need to unmute myself. I know that we had talked previously about how for unvaccinated travelers, the CDC recommendations are stricter than the DESE guidance on close contacts. It doesn't appear that DESE has issued anything on travel. I'm just checking the most recent on the, yeah. So would the test and stay only be available to close contacts? So it wouldn't be available, although logically there might be a parallel. Is my understanding that test and stay is not available for students who are unvaccinated, who travel domestically, who are asymptomatic, to be able to attend school after travel without a quarantine?
I don't know if we will have enough tests for that, because that has not been the recommendation yet.
Mhm.
You certainly could recommend it or require it. And we could try to get the testing. Again, it would be dependent on whether we could get enough tests for that. But we certainly could offer that. It is parallel, but it is obviously based on a sort of presumed close contact.
Right.
So you certainly could do that. But
Okay.
again, it would be dependent on two things, actually. It's going to be dependent on if we can get the tests, which I'm sure you can imagine after a February vacation or an April vacation or a winter vacation, could be quite a few.
Mhm.
And it's also going to significantly impact the staffing, because obviously somebody has to be there to supervise these administration of these tests and monitor students for 15 minutes and then report their results and so on. Yep. for these people. So we don't have it right now. If you want us to investigate the testing and the staffing, right now I'm just trying to secure staffing for the BINAX test and stay. We certainly could continue and look into that.
Okay, yeah, I think it would be worth looking into, especially if DESE continues to be silent on travel guidance. I do think we should, and I believe we've discussed possibly for staff where the numbers are smaller. My understanding is that we have very few unvaccinated staff, that it, again, in order to keep staffing levels as full as possible and have as little disruption as possible, to have at least test and stay available
for the
unvaccinated asymptomatic domestic travel.
Okay. We'll definitely look into that.
Okay.
Any recommended changes or questions or comments, or should we go with this?
Yeah, I had nothing else other than that travel question.
Okay, thank you. Caroline?
I just wanted to congratulate you on an incredibly comprehensive playbook. I just can't imagine the number of hours that you, and I'm sure some helpers, put in putting this together. So it's many compliments to you.
I know it's a bit dry, so I do apologize for that, but I'm hopeful it is comprehensive. I will do now have some frequently asked questions. I'm not going to go through them, however, because you certainly can read those on your own. And I am adding more each day. In fact, I have another entire sheet that I will be adding tonight and first thing in the morning before I send this out. So those are frequently asked questions. And then on slide 47, Mrs. Pruitt, we have some links and resources. And again, the links that are on there, if you can go to the next slide, you can see the first two, of course, is your policy and your guidelines. And I have that updated soon because I'm awaiting those changes. As soon as we get those from this evening, we will make that live. And then we have the music MIAA. We have the screener for people to utilize. And we are still going to make use of the soapy water because that is effective in breaking down the lipid barrier of the virus. And so we're making use of that, as well as the disinfection of the electrostatic cleaners and others. And then public health resources, these are all live and current. Again, you saw it said more to be added on links and resources, and I'm going to keep adding them as we get them, including all the links and resources used for the content of the playbook. But I wanted to get the content reviewed by you before I finished putting all the resources in. We were short on time, and I do hope to get this out literally tomorrow if we have your approval. I'm not trying to rush you. If you would like us to wait until you review it further, we can do that too. But do keep in mind that this is a live document, so you can call me with any grammatical issues or issues that don't require you to have a discussion on them, and I can make appropriate changes. If you do want to discuss them further, we certainly can do that in open session as well.
Dr. Cabral, do you need us to vote on it or just give like a roll call approval?
Roll call approval. We did not put a vote in the agenda because you don't necessarily need to vote on it. These aren't your policies and procedures. This is just sort of a data warehouse of that information. But I would like to have your approval to be sure that it has the content that you agree with, and that I want you to know that you have the ability to give constant input on what is in there and change as necessary.
So does anyone else have any questions or comments before we do a roll call? All right, Caroline?
I approve the playbook.
Durance, I approve and support the playbook.
Luca, support.
Wiseman, support.
Star, support.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I echo Caroline, that was an incredible amount of work, and thank you to everyone who spent hours clearly on that. Very thorough. All right. District updates.
That was it.
That was it.
That's pretty much all that we've been doing.
Public comment.
The first one is from Kathleen Sheehan, Harrison Avenue. Why was this agenda not posted on the school committee website?
It is posted on the town website. We post it whenever possible on the school website as a courtesy, but I don't know if it's there or not. I'm not the person who posts it, but if it isn't there, it is properly posted on the town website.
And I just want to add to that, we also make an effort to put it out on a variety of the social media pages as a courtesy as well.
Okay, thank you. I don't know that, I'm not on them, but thank you for doing that.
I might add that this was an add-on meeting. You know, certainly we wanted to deal with the playbook as soon as possible, and we simply didn't have all of the information from DESE in a timely fashion, so we couldn't do it earlier. And of course, you do have the 48-hour posting, you know, requirement for the from the open meeting law. So
and we did meet that,
right?
Yes.
Yes. Oh no, you absolutely did. It's just that there was less time to take care of all of the details that we normally have for a regular meeting that was scheduled long ago.
The next one is Maria Pacanzi, 5 Wedgewood Drive. You are requiring masks full-time in school since you believe they work. Just curious, shouldn't there be 0 close contacts in school if everyone is wearing a mask?
There should be. If everyone is 3 feet apart and wearing a mask, there will be 0. And we certainly hope that's the case. Of course, we're dealing with individual human beings. There are cases where someone may be injured, for example, and a nurse may need to take off a mask to assess their face or a situation, or they're obviously going to take their masks off when they're eating. Again, we will endeavor to have the distance appropriate in every case, but maybe if you don't have children or you're not in a school system, you may not be familiar with the very unique situations that can come up with a child. And certainly if a child needs to be comforted, if they fall, again, if a nurse is assessing them, there are many, many possibilities of when we may need to remove a mask. And certainly their comfort and safety comes first, and we would do that. But theoretically, if they're wearing masks, in fact, by definition, if they're wearing masks and 3 feet apart, they won't even be reported as necessary for quarantine. So yes, we certainly hope to have 0 close contacts.
Dr. Cabral, could I just add, depending on the type of mask and how appropriately they're worn, there will always be, I mean, that will determine how much leakage there is. Certainly the aerosol, these are microscopic particles, viral particles. So, you know, many children and honestly many adults don't wear masks entirely appropriately, don't cover both the nose and mouth at all times, don't have the mask fitted to their faces. So just that alone would allow some leakage. Hopefully, given that we have great ventilation and we are keeping students and staff at least 3 feet apart, that would counteract any leakage of the viral particles, but it's impossible. And as you pointed out, we're not going to have kids go all day without eating, without a snack, and without the occasional mask break, although most of those will be outdoors. But, you know, I think it's impossible to create a perfect situation. It would be wonderful if we have no close contacts, no infection, no transmission, but given the transmissibility of the Delta variant, and given the, as you said, the human nature component, it's unlikely that we can create a perfect situation the entire year with 0 close contacts.
I just want to add also that you know, there will be close contacts because our students won't be in many cases more than 6 feet apart. However, the transmission we are anticipating, just like last year, to have no transmission. But if your child is within 3 to 6 feet, we will be notifying you via a letter stating that your child is considered a close contact but does not need to quarantine, and then we ask that you just monitor for symptoms. And if they are between 0 feet and 3 feet, then they will be considered a close contact and may need to quarantine if the child is unvaccinated or can participate in the test and stay program, which Dr. Cabral reviewed. So as far as the close contact goes, you know, that is by definition, if you're within 6 feet of somebody, masked or not, that you are identified as a close contact for more than 15 minutes. But we are anticipating, like I said, no transmission, just like last year.
That was an excellent clarification because that is different than last year. And it was on one of the earlier slides of the presentation. 6 feet is still a close contact by DESE definition. But now, as opposed to last year until the very end of the year, 3 to 6 feet, while a close contact, they do not have to quarantine. It's optional. The parent may want them to, but we are not requiring it. 3 feet and under, it would involve a quarantine. So that's an excellent distinction. Thank you.
The next question is again from Kathleen Sheehan, Harrison Avenue. Do students have seating assignments at lunchtime? If not, how will the school be able to determine which students are close contacts?
They do. Elementary students, again, are in the cohorts that we discussed. They sit with their classroom. The higher students or the older students, we are utilizing a QR code process where they log in the number of the table and the seat they're in, and we have all of that electronically preserved.
And that's all we have.
Thank you. Okay, superintendent notes, Dr. Cabral.
Thank you. I only have a couple. One, we had a great opening of school, both on the Tuesday for all staff and today for all students. I wasn't able to get to every school today. Wednesdays are our construction days where I work with the builders, the designers, and the project manager. So unfortunately, I was not able, plus the Playbook. So I will be doing that in the next 2 days. And I'm so excited. Mrs. Pruitt and Mrs. Skinner were able to go to the buildings. And I'm so happy to hear that things were going so well and everyone was really happy to be back.
Dr. Cabral, you were in the new building.
Yeah. I literally was in the new building with my helmet and my vest, my fluorescent vest. So the topping off ceremony, speaking of the Blanche James building, of course, was on Monday. That is a very symbolic ceremony that the MSBA executive director was able to attend and speak, and also some of our local politicians, Senator Timilty, as well as a representative from Senator Brady's office. We certainly appreciate them being present, as well as select board and finance committee members, certainly school committee members, administrators of the new building. And it is, for those of you that may see pictures of this, we put out a press release today, but it is a symbolic ceremony that traditionally takes place in large building projects, where the final structural steel beam is put on the highest point of a building. And attached to that beam is a tree symbolizing making peace with any spirits that may be concerned with the nature disruption of the project, an American flag, and signatures of people who are participating in the project, and certainly anyone supportive of it. We thank all of the many people who took the opportunity to go to Town Hall, or go to the Ames Free Public Library, or come here to 50 Oliver Street Central offices to sign these large vinyl stickers that were placed directly on the beam. We all saw as it was hoisted and put in place. And we are extremely thankful to Jane Martin, the chair of the school planning committee, the builders of Bright Builders, our iron workers of local 7, our project manager, and certainly our architects for helping us get to this next milestone. And it was pretty extraordinary to look at it from the same spot we were at the groundbreaking ceremony, where they literally hadn't broken ground in April. And 4 months later, turning around and seeing that the steel structural process of the project, it was completed. So we are moving right along. Now comes the enclosure of the building, which, if done before fall weather hits us, allows us to get a lot more done inside the building in a more timely manner. So we're extremely hopeful that that will continue. I also want to send a special shout out to the abutters of the project, who have been extremely cooperative. And we have endeavored to make sure that they are aware of any changes that are going to affect them, their home, service to their home. And the project managers have been wonderful about that. And they have been wonderful about giving us feedback. And we're just excited to see that it's moving along as well as it has been so far. We have a long way to go, of course, but the trickiest part of a project, I'm learning, among many other construction things that I'll never use again in my life, is that the most surprises for delays tend to come in the beginning of the construction, when they're going underground, obviously, because we don't 100% know what's there until they start digging. We had a couple surprises, but they were remediated very quickly, and we were able to maintain a schedule that's ahead of the projected finish of the entire project. But that also happens when what is going to be the old Parkview School is demolished, and we are working now with abatements for lead and things like that. And when we go to put the fields, again, anything under the building that we just don't know is there. So those are the two, kind of takeoff and landing when you're flying a plane thing. We're through one of them. So that's good. And it's probably the most critical one, because at least if they're finding issues with the demolition, we still have the building, we're in it, we can use it. So I am very encouraged by that. Anyway, just wanted to throw out that knowledge on you about building construction. The last thing that I wanted to add was we are hoping, two things, sorry. again, about the building project, we're hoping to set up a day where our legislative delegation can come and tour the site. So I am working both with the delegation and the project manager to see if we can arrange that. So I'll let the school committee know when that would happen. And finally, I am working with the public health department to organize a flu clinic for staff and town employees. We're hoping for that to happen before the end of September, but we're working on it with our partnership with Rite Aid, and we will certainly let people know as soon as that is available. That would, of course, include any interested members of the school committee. And that's all I have tonight. Thanks.
Thank you. Assistant Superintendent notes. Chrissy?
Hi, good evening. I do want to share that I was able to get in a few buildings today, and the energy was amazing. The kids were so happy, and the teachers, it was so nice to see them being able to navigate one population in front of them rather than having to work to focus on students in front of them and students at home. The feedback has been great, and the teachers were just, and all staff were just really excited to feed off of the energy of the students as well. So I was able to visit Oliver Ames, Center School, and Parkview, and I'm hoping to get to the middle school, Richardson Olmsted, and Moreau Hall tomorrow. But I did post some pictures. I was able to take some pictures along my travels. So if you follow me on Twitter, you can see some of the things that I was able to see. Unfortunately, they only let me post 4 pictures, and I take about 40. So 4 pictures for one tweet. So that was great. And, you know, just like I said, there's just a really positive vibe going on in our buildings right now. And we really need to continue that momentum and just reassess and note just, you know, all the progress that we've made and all of all that we've been through, but really see how we're utilizing that as we proceed in the future. And our staff are just right along with us in finding that. I also wanted to let you all know that coming soon, within the next week or so, will be a survey sent to all stakeholders in the district. The survey will entail, we need to include some feedback or we need to receive feedback for how we are going to spend our ESSER 3 funding. So if you remember, we did receive federal funding from the feds in the form of one allocation, which is called ESSER 1, another allocation for ESSER 2, and this last allocation, ESSER 3. ESSER 3, when we apply for the grant, it is required for us to receive feedback on how we should spend it. There are certain areas in which we need to spend the money. So when you receive the survey, you will see those specific buckets noted. And we will ask your feedback on where you think the funding should go in the specific areas that we need to spend the money in. So, you know, it can't be to send all of our kids skiing for the weekend, even though we'd love to do that. You know, that's not an area that we might be able for recreation reasons, I should say, because I'm sure we could find some great reason academically to send them, but that wouldn't be something a bucket for that cause. So just so you're aware, we'll leave the survey open for a little while, and then we also need to discuss the survey at school committee and have any public comment on the feedback that we received. So that is coming, just to let you know. And also just to remind everyone, the ESSER 3 funding that we received, it will be noted on the survey how much we received. And this is to be spent over a few year period. So the end of the time spent is in 2024. And that's all I have today. Do you have any questions?
No.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. All right, school committee notes. Caroline.
Well, I'm not a particularly active user of social media, but I do want to say that it was such a pleasure seeing the many posts by parents. Would be a representative sample for me, but of their children heading off to their first day of school this year, just with all the excited smiles and carefully chosen terrific outfits for the first day. It just was uplifting to see those happy faces. And I really am, fingers crossed for a wonderful year for everyone. That's it.
All right. Who do I go to? Nancy.
Yep, same as, good luck this year to everybody. Tuesday, being on Zoom with everybody was a nice thing. I'm looking forward to the day that we can all get back together for an opening day, for the hour and a half, whatever it is, with everybody, because that's always, it's like a big reunion. So anyway, good luck to everybody. Stay safe.
Nancy, if I may, I had a teacher say to me today, which I really loved, that we aren't where we thought we would be, but we've made great progress and we're getting there. So I thought that was really just a very hopeful message. And I just wanted to share that when you said it was nice to see everyone via Zoom. We're not quite in person for that capacity yet, but we are getting there. We're getting closer and closer.
Sure are. Thank you.
Jackie?
Nothing tonight, thank you.
All right. Jen?
It's been really fun this week to have 3 days in a row of positive school activities. So the topping off ceremony Monday, the welcome back for all staff yesterday. It was, as Nancy said, although via Zoom, great to see so many names and faces. And then of course, sending my own kids off today. So, and I was frankly thrilled to not be in the OA parking lot because they're on the bus. So, yeah. So can't say that I was on campus today to see smiling faces in person, but certainly saw a lot through social media. So hopefully we keep the positive vibes and the good momentum going. That's it.
Thank you. Okay, so before I go into the executive session, our next meeting is September 9th at 5 o'clock. And I'd like to make a motion to enter into executive session, not to return to open session for the purposes of discussing strategy with respect to the collective bargaining for the Easton Educators Association, units A, B, and paraprofessionals, and for discussing a contract. And in my opinion, having this discussion in public would be detrimental to the bargaining position of the school committee. Do I have a second?
Wiseman, second.
All right, roll call vote.
O'Neill, yes.
Durance, yes.
DeLuca, yes.
Wiseman, yes.
Star, yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.